Once upon a time, in a land not so far away, there was a village. And in that village, there was a higgledy-piggledy house. And in that house, there lived a writer called Julia, who conjured up all sorts of magical creatures.
Ogres.
With just the stroke of her pen. There's a big clumsy dragon, a rather unfortunate stick, and something that rhymes with buffalo. Can you guess what it is?
Gruffalo!
It was going to be about a tiger, but nothing rhymes with tiger.
Welcome to the magical world of Julia Donaldson. It's a realm where the bullies never win. Where even the smallest person can achieve the mightiest things. Where princesses can be doctors.
You were absolutely right.
And no matter where you're from, you can be friends with whoever you choose.
I love that she's always made the characters so vivid, funny, and, a little bit scary.
Julia's writing has such a joy to it. They've really been the soundtrack to my kids' childhood.
They have this magic without any wizards, and it's all words.
Julia Donaldson is a really important part of how people think of this country. Brazil does football, France does food, we do children's books, and we do them amazingly.
Gonna have lunch with a Gruffalo. Gruffalo? What's a Gruffalo?
Julia's best-selling book, The Gruffalo, has sold over 17 million copies and has been translated into 100 languages. Which means that wherever you are in the world, somebody else will be sharing the same bedtime story as you.
Lots of the stories are being read by children all over the world and parents, and if you stop and think about it, it's a bit mind-boggling, but I'm not usually thinking about that. I'm usually thinking about, how we run out of milk or something.
So if you're sitting comfortably, let's begin. Julia Donaldson lives with her husband, Malcolm, who's a respected doctor, and a fish called Swimmy, in a leafy Sussex village in the shadow of the South Downs. It's a house full of music and stories and theatre.
OK, so we need to get all the props.
Because Julia doesn't just write her books, she performs them too.
Superworm. Now, we've got to decide which worm. We've got 3 worms.
Is one longer, do you think?
So this is the longest one. This is a very long one.
Oh, this is the
This
easiest
is
to
the
skip
old
with.
one.
Or should we take that
Anyway.
Hello, I'm going to haunt you.
I can't find room on the broom.
Must be there.
Amongst Julia's colourful cast of characters, there's one who stands out from all the rest. The Gruffalo, in case you didn't know, is the tale of a wily little mouse who invents a monstrous imaginary creature to scare off the other bigger animals in the wood who want to eat him. And the first chapter in our story is about how the Gruffalo was born. You could say it was a Donaldson team effort, because without a little help from Julia's family, the book might never have been written at all.
When I started to write the Gruffalo, although I'd had lots of educational books published, I didn't feel I was regarded as a proper writer, so I didn't have a lot of confidence, really.
The story was inspired by a Chinese folk tale about a little girl who journeys through the forest, cleverly outwitting a tiger. But in Julia's version of the book, the hero was a mouse. And she wanted a more magical, mystical name for her baddie.
Tiglofant. Perhaps he was going to be a mixture of a tiger and an elephant. A wyger, a grub strip, a shroop, a margle jimp, a snargle? Yes, a snargle. So I had this line, silly old something, he ought to know. I changed that, doesn't he know? There's no such thing as a oh, so I had turned in oh. Silly old fox, we're getting there now. He ought to know there's no such thing as a snargle Gruffalo. That's the first time that I've got the word Gruffalo in writing.
And when she said to me, Malcolm, I'm thinking of changing the tiger, which doesn't rhyme with anything, into the Gruffalo, I famously said, no, I prefer the tiger. Thank goodness she didn't listen to me.
Just think about that word, Gruffalo, because it's gruff and it's a buffalo and it's both.
It's such a juicy word, Gruffalo. You imagine this horrible creature with warts and spikes.
And of course, because it rhymes with buffalo and because it's got that word gruff, as in the billy goat's gruff, it's a magic mixture. It's just so clever to think of a name that says so much. Perfect.
I'd got about halfway through writing the Gruffalo, and I thought, oh, this is going to go on and just be impossible to write. And I remember saying to Alistair, our middle son, oh, I don't know about this Gruffalo book. I think I'm just going to give up. And he said, oh, no, don't, Mum, I think it's good. So thank you, Alistair. His face is covered with chicken pox, and his favourite food is something fox. Licked his lips, fox and chips. So many different versions that I just wasn't happy with. On toast, with cream, pickled, scrambled snake, pureed, curried, chocolate. So I've got all sorts of possible ways of cooking animals. In my first complete version of the story, the mouse just says to the predators, I'm going to meet the Gruffalo, and they run away.
And then Jerry, our younger son, said, look, Mum, why doesn't the fox and the snake and the owl, why don't they just eat the mouse on the spot?
And so I then made it be that the mouse was going to meet the Gruffalo here by these rocks, and his favourite food is roasted fox or, owl ice cream or whatever, scrambled snake. And actually those bits are the sort of funniest bits in the book and some of the bits that children really like. So thank you, Jerry.
So that was a good effort from Julia, very good effort from Alistair, great effort from Jerry, and zero negative input from Malc.
It took Julia a whole year to complete the Gruffalo. Then the story sat on a publisher's desk for months and months, waiting for an illustrator to bring the monstrous creature of her imagination to life.
A mouse took a stroll through the deep, dark wood. A fox saw the mouse, and the mouse looked good. Where are you going to, little brown mouse? Come and have lunch in my underground house.
It's terribly kind of you, Fox, but no. I'm going to have lunch with a Gruffalo.
A Gruffalo? What's a Gruffalo?
A Gruffalo? Why, didn't you know? He has terrible tusks and terrible claws and terrible teeth in his terrible jaws.
Where are you meeting him?
Here, by these rocks. And his favourite food is roasted fox.
Roasted fox? I'm off, Fox said. Goodbye, little mouse. And away he sped.
Finally, Malcolm had a stroke of inspiration. He suggested sending the story to a wizard of an artist called Axel, and he had some terribly ingenious ideas.
So I do a pencil drawing first. So you can see I've done this before. It's quite easy for me, a Gruffalo. Done probably tens of thousands in the last 22 years. And then I've got my ink, and I usually start at the top, the Gruffalo with the horns, ears, terrible teeth and his terrible jaws. the tail, knobbly knees, and the mouse. So when I first drew the Gruffalo, I obviously had to follow Julia's description in the text, but the overall shape of the Gruffalo was really my thing, and I added the horns and the tail and his furriness. The body. I can do this endlessly. Purple prickles. And then I need to let it dry a little bit.
In Axel's initial sketches for the Gruffalo, the animals had clothes. Actually, the editor said to me, Julia, I don't think this is right, do you? And I agreed. In my mind, they weren't just normal woodland animals. Axel did several sketches of the Gruffalo, but in one of them he looked rather like a wild boar. In one he looked a bit too much like an ogre.
Ah, messed it up. Now it happened, you see? That wasn't dry, so I smudged it.
And then there was just the perfect one where he was slightly hunched over and scary, but a bit goofy as well, and that was just right. Suddenly I knew that's who the Gruffalo was.
Okay. So this is how I draw a Gruffalo.
For broadcaster Claudia Winkleman, reading the Gruffalo is the secret to getting her children to sleep. She's come to visit wizard artist Axel to get a rare glimpse of the original illustrations for her family's favourite book.
Hello.
Hello.
Axel, I'm Claudia. Thank you so much for having me.
Hello, Claudia. Please come in.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
The list of Axel and Julia's collaborations is full of much-loved gems. But it was the Gruffalo that would cement their creative partnership.
This is, of course, the Gruffalo.
This is the Gruffalo box.
Are we allowed to have a look?
Yes, and I don't have white gloves, you see. Haven't reached that stage yet. So this was my sketchbook at the time.
Extraordinary. I mean, look at it. The mouse.
Well, he's the true hero of the story,
Yeah, of
obviously, but if it was called The Mouse, the book, I think it wouldn't have been so successful, to be honest.
I love all the faces.
So this was the first sketch of the encounter of Mouse and Gruffalo. He looks more scary there.
Yeah. After the Gruffalo, is it true? Will you quietly place a Gruffalo in every story?
Not in each one, but in most books there's a little Gruffalo now, and people are now looking for it. I think the first one was Snail in the Way, where there's a child drawing Gruffalo in the sand, and now I have to carry on because
You've got to carry
everybody
on. Just officially, on behalf of the world, I would like
and
to
it's a nice challenge for me to hide the Gruffalo now.
I bet. It's just extraordinary that this magical partnership, and it's her words, your beautiful pictures, and maybe that's why it works so well, because of the enormous amount of respect you have for each other, that you're not trying to give her adjectives and she's not trying to tell you.
No, we both have that, probably healthy distance and just marvel at what the other creates and without interfering. Maybe that's the secret of the success. I don't know. We've never tried any other way of collaborating, so it's a winning formula, obviously. So we shouldn't change it.
To my mind, it's just this perfect marriage, and I know they both see other people, and they'll always be associated with each other, and they've made the most brilliant work together.
I didn't really expect the Gruffalo would be published because at that time, a lot of books were about relationships between a parent and child. I can't help feeling that, although there are some good books like that, on the whole, for a story, you need to either get rid of the parents, have a good old orphan, or have the child or the animal equivalent of a child in a deep dark wood, or, wherever it is outside their comfort zone. And I think that's what tends to make a good story.
Have you ever seen a Gruffalo? A toothy fellow, big horns. Well, If you go down to the woods today, you could be in for a big surprise.
There are lots of children's stories set in woods. And I suppose a wood is a kind of no man's land for someone who ventures in there. The trees look as if they've got faces. Could be animals hiding behind the trees. It's a little bit scary and mysterious. I suppose that's why it's a popular setting for children's stories.
I think a good children's story has got to somehow or other see the world from the child's point of view. And so one of the perfect books of this kind is, of course, the Gruffalo, because you see the world from the eye of the smallest creature.
Fairy stories are not there to tell you that dragons are real. Fairy stories are there to show you that dragons can be defeated. So the mouse is in the wood, and the wood, as you go on, is full of more and more and more things that are dangerous for mice. Foxes, snakes, owls, all these, like, every one of these things wants to eat the mouse. But the mouse is able to deal with that by conjuring up this greater demon, which turns out to be real.
It's Fox, said the mouse. Why, Fox, hello! Fox took one look at the Gruffalo. Oh, help, he said. Goodbye, little mouse. And off he ran to his underground house.
Well, Gruffalo, said the mouse, you see, everyone is afraid of me. But now my tummy's beginning to rumble. My favourite food is Gruffalo crumble.
Gruffalo crumble, the Gruffalo said, and quick as the wind he turned and fled.
The story of the Gruffalo is a total hit in our house, and I'm going to show you how to make a Gruffalo crumble.
For writer and baker Nadia Hussain, the message at the heart of the Gruffalo has played a big role in her family's recipe for success.
There's something about the message behind the story about being very teeny tiny and believing that you can be strong if you believe you're strong. And you can also outsmart the biggest, strongest of them all. This is the fruity base to our Gruffalo crumble. That message is something that my kids have always taken with them whenever they read that book and they have a moment where they're not quite sure and they're just not sure of themselves. It's that story that always makes them realise that you don't have to be big and strong. You can be little and smart. So we've got our fruit and then we've got our crumble. Let's put the two together. The Gruffalo is definitely their favourite. Through the different stages of their lives, they have taken that book with them. And that's the power of a good book, is that it can take you through the ages. And I know as a 35-year-old, even I need to read the Gruffalo sometimes. And there we have it, fresh out of the oven. Delicious, fruity, sweet, oaty Gruffalo crumble. And not a Gruffalo in sight.
The Gruffalo.
The Gruffalo. The Gruffalo.
When the Gruffalo was first published in 1999, everyone fell in love with Julia's plucky mouse and Axel's goofy Gruffalo.
The Gruffalo has been read, loved and memorised by children across the world.
When the book first came out, I can remember people talking about the fact that something could be so perfectly written.
When it was published, there was this wonderful review in The Observer, and I was just floating this cloud of glory.
The one and only Julia Donaldson.
Julia was celebrated far and wide. She became Children's Laureate and received a CBE.
Julia Donaldson and Axel Scheffler.
To start off with, I felt in some ways like the only fan in the village, you know. And then when she got so popular with the Gruffalo, I felt very vindicated. I'd realised years before that Axel Scheffler is a genius, but it took me a lot longer to realise that my own wife is a genius.
The story of Julia's life would make a good book of its own, if she ever had time to write it. She was born in Hampstead, North London, in 1948. Her father was a geneticist at Maudsley Hospital, and her mother was a secretary. Her younger sister Mary arrived 2 years later. The family lived in a tall, thin house, with Julia's parents on the ground floor, her aunt and uncle upstairs, and Granny in the attic. You could say it was a bit of a squash and a squeeze.
My father played the cello and a quartet would come to our house, so my sister and I used to give them their tea and their biscuits because my mother would be out at choir practice and she'd come back singing and, there was lots of music going on.
From an early age, Julia had a precocious talent for songwriting.
At Christmas, I wrote a little musical, a musical version of Little Red Riding Hood. And my sister was Little Red Riding Hood. My mother was Wonderful Wolf. My father ruined it all as a woodcutter by just sort of getting the giggles. And I was very, very cross with him. I still can remember the songs from that. What's your favourite Christmas dish? Some like chicken, some like fish. But if I had my Christmas wish, I'd choose a little girl. That was the Wolf's song.
Julia's family home was creative and crowded and just a little bit chaotic, but it was happy. Until one day when she was 6, something changed.
I remember that we had this kind of jokey thing that we would drag my father out of bed in the mornings. And on one particular morning, he was just a bit stiff and sort of achy. And the doctor apparently said it was just some kind of flu.
The doctor was wrong. Julia's father had contracted polio, which affects your ability to walk.
I didn't know what was going on, really. It was quite exciting to go to this hospital ward, and there was a nice sister who would give us chocolates, and one time there was a Christmas tree. So I just didn't really realise how serious it all was till one day when I think I was ill in bed and my mother was having a meal at a table in the bedroom, and I suddenly saw she was crying. And grown-ups just didn't cry then, and suddenly, just in a flash, I sort of got it, yeah.
Hospitals can be strange and scary places, especially for small boys and girls. But Julia knows that stories can help to make daunting things feel a little less frightening.
Here are the children in Wallaby Ward. Most of them happy, but some of them bored. A girl's feeling shy and a baby is howling. A toddler's cross and a teenager's scowling. A visitor's jumping about like a frog. But look who's arrived. It's the hospital dog.
The star of Julia's latest book is Dot, the hospital dog, who visits poorly children and puts a smile on their faces. Dot was brought to life by Sarah Ogilvie, an artist who is well known for her playful canine characters.
I think the way she writes is very direct. There's definitely no fluffiness to her stories, and I think that's what I like about it. She's kind of got a bit of a no-nonsense approach. It was just a real delight as an illustrator to take on.
I knew straight away that the story was going to be really that this dog visits children in hospital, and that the sort of punchline was going to be that the children come and visit the dog. So the dog had to somehow be ill, and I decided that was going to be a traffic accident. I originally wrote, the car hits her leg with a sickening crack, So you sense the bones being broken. And I think the editor asked if I could tone that down a little bit. So now the car hits her leg with a sudden loud smack. Some people have said to me, oh, weren't that upset children? But, I mean, it gets better. And, I think children can take that. I think children quite like a bit of disaster somewhere in a story. It'd be a bit boring if nothing upsetting happened at all.
I think the most successful children's writing is writing that doesn't patronise and that acknowledges the truths of life, which are that there is good and there is bad and there is darkness and there is light. And I think if you can have someone who acknowledges both, it's quite a relief for children, because otherwise it's this thing that's not being talked about that they know is there. So as a reader reading the books to my children, I appreciate that because I think it teaches those lessons early on in a way that isn't overwhelming.
Julia and her sister Mary became quite used to hospitals, what with all the visits to their dad. And thanks to the care of some clever doctors, their father was able to return home with the help of a wheelchair, and the family home was filled with music and laughter once again.
Luckily, my father, his big thing was music, playing the cello, so he still could play his cello. And he drove at first this little popping sort of invalid car, but later with hand control. So he did lead a reasonably full and fulfilled life. But I do remember on one occasion he just threw something on the floor and said, "I wish I could walk." And that was a sort of big shock, because normally he's very even-tempered.
At the dawn of the swinging 60s, Julia was on the brink of her teenage years. Here she is looking all studious and straight-laced. But looks can be deceptive, as her not-so-secret teenage diary reveals. Writer, broadcaster and all-round Donaldson fan Victoria Corrin Mitchell has come to Sussex to discover a little more about Julia's teenage exploits.
So I've unearthed my teenage diaries. I did let my friends actually read them, so they're not that private,
What did you enjoy at that time?
I loved lists and charts, and in this diary I've got a list of my likes and dislikes. Maybe you'd like to have a look at them.
Pet likes and dislikes. Lists and charts is actually the first one. You enjoyed those. Likes, lists and charts. Michaelmas daisies, counties, toast, pretending to be an imaginary person. And you've got some dislikes here. Let's just have a look at these. Feeling depressed, cold hands and feet. Being with two people you know well but who don't know each other or don't get on together. Oh, God, that's nice of you. My fear is being with two people who get on better with each other than they do with you.
That's awful as well.
You're obviously a nicer friend.
We find that lower down on the list.
If you made a list of your likes and dislikes now, would they be the same, or what would be on it that wasn't on it then?
Well, lots of people I know, they completely disassociate themselves from their past self, whereas I don't, and that might be why I'm a children's writer, because I can still feel all those things, and I still feel I very much am the same person as I was when I wrote those diaries.
Did you have boyfriends?
Well, I went to an all-girls school, so the only way you could really meet boys was by going to these awful dances. I've got a lot of entries about these boys I met at parties. Sylvia and I have been thinking of names for all the various men and boys we've come across in the last week. They are as follows. Super, the super but treacherous boy I met at dance on Friday. Shrivel, the weedy, thin, curly-haired, smiling boy who saw Sylvia home. Slobber, the one who saw me home. Pinioner, the one who saw Geraldine home and pinioned her against a wall. Healthy, boy who got my telephone number on Sunday.
Did he phone? Did he ever ring? Healthy?
I don't think he did, no. He was probably a bit too healthy, though.
Right. Oh, you don't like them healthy?
Well, he's probably a bit too, not quite Mick Jaggerish enough,
most of Julia's teenage crushes were short-lived. But her diary reveals one romance that would last a lifetime. Julia was head over heels in love with theatre. And a fleeting appearance alongside leading lady Judi Dench in A Midsummer Night's Dream at the Old Vic would fuel Julia's schoolgirl ambitions of becoming an actress.
I've at last had my careers talk with Mrs. Handley, and she doesn't seem at all disapproving that I want to be an actress. One thing that suddenly revived all my hopes and convictions was the smell on the stairs of the bus going home on Thursday. It was just like the backstage Old Vic smell, and it all came back to me. Standing by the stage door with Ernie, the doorman, on the first night when someone said my eyes were shining with happiness. And especially being on the stage with all that dark watching audience. All my determination returned. I only wish I had more talent as well as determination.
And are you 100% happy with the choice you made? I mean, obviously you're one of the most successful writers in history, but do you partly wish you were an actress?
It was probably like a sort of, you know, second choice, I'd say, being a writer.
Julia never did get to play leading lady at the Old Vic. But dreams really do come true. In the magical world of the stories that she created, Julia would one day take centre stage.
So it's time for me to introduce you to the lady that you're here to see today.
The way my career's gone, it's kind of gone full circle, and now I am doing a lot of acting, albeit it's just acting out my own stories.
Julia Donaldson!
Some authors cringe and hate facing the public, and I absolutely lap it up.
Alongside Julia and Malcolm, today's star performers include their son Alistair, daughter-in-law Chris, and grandchildren Poppy and Felix.
Doing the shows with three generations is really a lot of fun. There's always a bit of a haphazard, homemade feeling to them where things just come together at the last minute. And there are plenty of mistakes and things that we might do a bit differently. But actually, I think that's part of the fun, and it makes it quite charming.
Julia Donaldson has retained her innocence and, of course, mixed it with integrity and ability and brilliance. But I think in the world today, there's a lot of cynics out there, and there's some tough things going on. But she remains joyful, and I think joy is something that's very important to us all.
Are you there, wise old man? Yes. Go away, go away. Oh, sorry.
So I'm going to draw Zog.
Traditional fairy stories are full of princesses simply waiting to be rescued. But in Zog and the Flying Doctors, Julia's heroine, Princess Pearl, takes a very different approach. She teams up with a loyal knight, Sir Gadabout, to travel the world curing all manner of strange illnesses with the help of their trusty dragon, Zog.
Princess Pearl is a very modern princess. She's not waiting for a knight to come and, you know, save her. She's not a damsel in distress. And Princess Pearl's a very feisty girl who, you know, she doesn't want to wear a silly frilly dress. She wants to be a doctor.
She tiptoed to her uncle's room. The king lay in his bed. She held a spoonful to his mouth. "Now open wide," she said. After just one spoonful, her uncle felt much stronger. And after spoonful two, he wasn't orange any longer. After spoonful 3, the king was dancing with delight. Princesses can be doctors. You were absolutely right.
There's a sort of feminist story in there, in what on the surface of it is a very traditional sort of children's story, but then she slips in quite subversive themes to her books. You wouldn't really notice, but they are provocative and thought-provoking themes, which I completely applaud her for.
My favourite book is Zog by Julia Donaldson, and I like it because it's got like things that the princess actually wants to be a doctor. Like, it has like the message, be who you want to be, you just keep trying.
When Julia was 20, she would fall for her very own Sir Gadabout during a blissful summer holiday in Paris. Julia and her university friend Maureen were in the city of romance to improve their French. At least that's what they told their parents. When they were unexpectedly joined by a dashing young student medic called Malcolm.
I just invited myself over and took my huge straw hat, which I got in Kenya during my gap year, and my guitar, which is very battered, and I brought lots of songs by The Who and the Beatles and the Animals and the Kinks, and we started busking.
As soon as Malcolm was there, you know, we were doing all these rip-roaring numbers and songs from shows and so on. Yeah, it was such fun.
And for the first time in my life, I was deeply friendly with people who were girls. It was a real first for me. The background to our happiness was that Julia was madly in love with somebody in Bristol, so it was an entirely safe relationship. And so I subconsciously fell in love with Julia without realising.
We used to collect the money in this big straw hat which Malcolm had brought back from his travels in Africa.
And one day we were crossing the Seine and the wind blew and it blew off my hat.
And the hat fell into the Seine. Disaster.
So I raced off the bridge down to the water's edge and I stripped down to my underpants, which were white.
Noble Malcolm stripped off and dived in and rescued this hat.
When I came back to the bank of the Seine, not only were Julia and Maureen there jumping around for joy, but there was a whole crowd of men and women and children, and my white pants had become see-through. So rather than it being a joyful moment, it was incredibly embarrassing.
So he had to be my hero after that.
After that heady summer in Paris, Julia and Malcolm returned to their lives at Bristol University, where Malcolm was studying medicine and Julia was reading drama and French. Their romance blossomed.
I very clearly remember the evening Malcolm proposed to me. He'd taken me out to a lovely French restaurant and there was a candle on the table like there always was back in the 70s. So then he said, darling, will you marry me? And I leant across the candle. I'm sure I was going to accept anyway, but my hair caught fire.
And I'm not the quickest man in an emergency, but for some reason I just swiped my hand down the side of her hair that had caught light, and there was a smell of singed hair pervading the restaurant.
So I had to say yes after that.
So Julia and Malcolm began their happy ever after, and their wedding was a spectacularly theatrical affair.
The wedding was quite a memorable day. Julia had written an operetta especially for the occasion, so we had a song about we three with Maureen, Julia and me, sung of course by all three of us. Then the proposal song, which was about me being a bit tardy, proposing.
There was a bridesmaid song, matron runner's song, and the usher's song. I remember thinking that we should definitely have a horse and carriage to go from the church to our wedding reception. So then I phoned the local rag and bone man. He said, oh, yeah, it cost you £5, mind. So he decked out his cart, and we did travel from the church to the reception with the procession behind. The rag and bone man kind of then invited himself in and was, you know, enjoyed himself, I think.
So Betty O'Barley and Harry O'Hay wed one another the very next day, and everyone, even the snail who was late, said, "Don't they look happy and don't they look great?" This, they agreed as they sprinkled confetti on Harry O'Hay and his beautiful Betty, is the best wedding ever, the best wedding yet, the wedding that no one will ever forget.
It was a lovely feeling, really, that I was already great friends with Malcolm. So when I started to feel these sort of romantic feelings, it wasn't like I'd worry that he'd discover some awful thing about me or vice versa. So I think it's a lovely feeling if you can fall in love with a friend.
Vous êtes français et nous ne sommes que des Anglais fous. Nous chanterons pour vous si vous nous donnez vos sous.
5 decades on from their memorable wedding day, Julia and Malcolm remain the same joyful double act.
Nous aimons le café français, mais nous préférons le thé anglais, s'il vous plaît. Vous êtes français.
We do get on very well. I think it must be so toe-curling to hear about how people love each other, how they get on well, and I don't want to go on about it, but I think that we do share a lot.
People sometimes say, what's the secret of a successful marriage? I just think it's quite simple, just marry the right person in the first place.
Si vous nous donnez vos sous,
2 years after they were married, Julia and Malcolm moved into a house beside the seaside, in sunny Brighton. Malcolm was on his way to becoming a hospital paediatrician, while Julia worked for a publisher, penning songs after hours.
We started singing in folk clubs, and Julia made up funny songs, often spoof folk songs. So she started to write songs in earnest and sent some songs to Playaway and Play School, and she got taken on as a freelance writer.
The story today is about a little old lady lived all by herself, with a table and chairs and a jug on the shelf. A wise old man heard her grumble and grouse, "There's not enough room in my house." And she said, "Oh, wise old man, would you help me, please? My house is a squash and a squeeze." Taking your hand.
I used to watch Playaway when I was a kid. Little did I know that Julia Donaldson was writing the songs. And when she told me that, it sort of all made sense, really. Julia is absolute genius at constructing these rhymes, and they never slow down the story.
Alongside the songwriting, Julia and Malcolm's family began to grow. First there was Hamish, then came Alistair, followed by Jerry. The colourful imaginary worlds of her children soon crept into the pages of Julia's books.
My oldest son, Hamish, he was very, very imaginative, and he had an imaginary friend who came out of the mirror, you know, it's his reflection. And this inspired a series of books about a very naughty princess called Princess Mirror-Belle. So in the Princess Mirror-Belle books, there's a very normal girl, Ellen, kind of quite shy girl, and her, not exactly imaginary friend, she's sort of real, but this other character who's like a reflection comes out of the mirror and is very sort of swanky and tells stories about her wonderful life inside the mirror. But I hasten to add that it's not a princessy book in the sense of being all, you know, sort of frills and pink and little ponies and unicorns and so on, not at all.
Ellen was just giving herself a quick check in the full-length mirror when a voice said, "What's happened to your feet?" It was a voice that she knew very well. It was coming from the mirror, and it belonged to Princess Mirror-Belle. Ellen and Mirror-Belle had met several times before. Mirror-Belle looked just like Ellen's reflection, but instead of staying in the mirror, as reflections usually do, she had a habit of coming out of it. She was much cheekier and naughtier than Ellen, and she was always boasting about her life in the palace and the magic things that she said happened to her. Ellen hadn't seen Mirror-Belle for a while, and she wasn't sure how pleased she was to see her now. All too often, Mirror-Belle had got them both into trouble and then escaped into a mirror, leaving Ellen to take the blame.
To capture the vibrant adventures of Ellen and her precocious alter ego, Princess Mirror-Belle, Julia turned to artist Lydia Monks, who loves a splash of colour herself.
Now she's got bunches like that. She's not really your classic princess. She's very naughty. I just wanted to be quite ordinary looking. So there she is. Now she is sitting on top of someone else from another book. Can you guess what it is yet? Well, I think with all children's books, we're not writing them for children necessarily. I'm sure Julia's not. We do have children in mind, but we're doing them for ourselves. So as adults, we're looking at them and deciding what we like as a story. I think maybe you just have to keep that child's mind alive, and just that fascination and the wonder at things, at the world, you know, is kind of important for a children's story, I think.
Julia's eldest son, Hamish, would inspire another story called The Paper Dolls. It's about a little girl with a very vivid imagination, rather like Hamish himself.
Hamish was our first child, much loved, absolutely besotted by him.
We were first-time parents, and we were terrifically proud of Hamish and his spirit, and he had a wonderful imagination, and he wouldn't really play with toys. He would just play with bits of cardboard and say they were ice creams or violins, and he just lived in his imagination, really.
There was once a girl with tiger slippers, and a ceiling with stars on it, and a butterfly hair slide, which she kept losing, and 2 goldfish, and a nice mother who helped her to make some paper dolls. They were Ticky and Tacky and Jackie the Backy, and Jim with 2 noses, and Joe with a bow.
The Paper Dolls is a story about a little girl who makes paper dolls with her mum. She takes them on adventures around her house and around the garden, and they keep sort of coming up against some sort of peril or danger. But the paper dolls are holding hands and they escape every time, until one time when a boy with a pair of scissors comes along, and they're not so lucky this time.
Every parent feels their child is unique and special. But gradually, Julia and Malcolm began to realise that Hamish was just a little bit more different than most.
It's difficult to talk about Hamish because I'd actually need, you know, hundreds of hours. He was an absolutely lovely person, but also he was someone that no one could really handle, you know. Hamish just had huge behaviour problems and was always getting chucked out of different schools. It was very, very, very difficult.
There were major difficulties, and whilst these were manageable just about in early childhood and the primary school years, the difficulties escalated. We divided people into the clickers and the non-clickers. The non-clickers were people who thought that Hamish was basically a normal boy who was just a bit difficult. And the clickers were people who realised that there was something more. We were all non-clickers to begin with, but round about the age of 10 or 11, adolescence, we started to become clickers. And of course, by the time Hamish had his first psychotic illness, almost everybody had become clickers.
When Hamish entered his teenage years, he became increasingly troubled. At 17, he was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, a very serious psychiatric condition.
When Hamish had his first schizophrenic episode, there was a feeling of relief in the sense that something that had been bubbling under the ground, or simmering underground for such a long time, it seemed, had come to the surface and declared itself and could be perhaps helped. But very sadly, it was the beginning of the end, really.
We love him so much. We loved him. We've got such good memories of him. He was such a funny person, such a protective brother, had so many good qualities. But his life was so difficult. He had these very severe mental health problems, which had led to other problems related to alcohol. When he would be psychotic, he could be incredibly threatening and violent due to his illness. And that made many aspects of life really difficult.
In November 2003, the Donaldson family received the knock at the door that they had dreaded for so long. Hamish had taken his own life. He was just 25.
Like, we got a film of when Hamish was a little boy, and friends can't understand how we could watch it without dissolving into tears, but actually probably we would watch it and dissolve into tears during Hamish's lifetime. Lots of people assume that, understandably, that Malcolm and I and Alistair and Jerry are just grieving because Hamish died, that we're grieving his death, but certainly Malcolm and I, as well, we're grieving for lots of things in his life, and that was the case even when he was alive. During the very, very difficult years in his late teens and 20s, then we were sort of grieving for that little boy. And with Hamish, I just wish he could have had a better life.
I think it's very important to get over how special Hamish was, how much loved he was, how brightly his stars shone. But it's also true that we've really been through the ringer. I think what people didn't realise is how much grieving we'd done during Hamish's life, and how his death came as a release, that he was at peace at last.
I think the paper dolls, that story, I think, that's the one that makes me think the most about Hamish and about death and about loss in a healing, positive way, not in a horrible way. I've never discussed with Mum whether that story was particularly inspired by her feelings about Hamish, but I feel like it's a very special story for our family, and I know it's a story that means a lot to my father in particular. I think that's all very much tied up with how he feels about Hamish.
And the pieces of paper all joined together, and the paper dolls flew into the little girl's memory, where they found white mice and fireworks and a starfish soap and a kind granny and the butterfly hair slide, and more lovely things each day and each year.
The paper dolls fly into the little girl's memory. She'll never forget them, so actually they're not really gone. So it's a story about childhood imagination, but also you could read it as a story about loss, bereavement, and about sort of life. I love how it begins with a girl and her mother, and it ends with the girl grown up, and she's got her own daughter, and they're making paper dolls. It's like this circle that continues.
And the girl grew into a mother who helped her own little girl make some paper dolls. They were Poppy and Pinky, and Binky the Blinky, and Fred with one eyebrow, and Flo with a bow. And they jumped, and they danced, and they sang.
Christmas has come to Sussex. The lights are up, the puddings have been made. The Gruffalo has come to town.
Cottage, little cottage, a little heart.
And Julia and Malcolm are putting the finishing touches to their Christmas tree.
Yes. Maybe that one. So put one, Malcolm, sort of centrally below the fairies.
I think it's a slightly bigger tree than you... Oh, dear. Sorry, Julia, could you pass the trumpet?
I think that's all right.
That's good.
Just about all right.
Then Stickman helped Santa deliver the toys to fast-asleep girls and to fast-asleep boys. Faster and faster, they fly through the snow till Santa says, "Only one chimney to go." Stick lady's lonely. The children are sad. It won't feel like Christmas without their stick dad. They toss and they turn in their family bed, but what is that clattering noise overhead? Someone is tumbling into their house. Is it a bird or a bat or a mouse? Or could it... yes, could it just possibly be... I'm Stickman! I'm Stickman! I'm Stickman! That's me! And I am sticking right here in the family tree.
My little boy, I remember when he first read it, he said, anybody who can write a story about a stick is the best writer in the world. I mean, if that's not praise, I don't know what is.
When you open those books, they open like a door. They offer you a world that you can get into. The memorability of the prose and the beauty of those pictures asks you to join in and to expand that world and become part of it.
These books are gifts to the world. She's put out these really positive, beautiful, heartwarming stories that are going to be passed through generations.
I get so many letters from parents and children and teachers who show me stories that the children have written, somebody feeling that I'm part of this, something's being passed from generation to generation. I do hope that some of those children who read my stories might go on to be writers themselves.
I opened the book and in I strode. Now nobody can find me. I've left my chair, my house, my rose, my tent and my words behind me.
I'm wearing the cloak. I've slipped on the ring. I've swallowed the magic potion. I've fought with a dragon, dined with a king, and dived in a bottomless ocean.
I've opened a book and made some friends. I've shared their tears and laughter.
And followed their road with its bumps and bends to the happily ever after.
I finished my book, and out I came. The cloak can no longer hide me.
My chair and my house are just the same, but I have a book inside me.